Joining me now is Senator Tom Carper of Delaware. Senator Carper is a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where he sits on the Healthcare Subcommittee. Senator Carper has long focused on healthcare policy and helped craft provisions in the Affordable Care Act. And as we discussed a little bit backstage, played a key role in herding the cats. Senator, please.
Thank you.
Take a seat, and thank you for joining us. Let's talk about a little news of the day to start with. There's been a lot of speculation. You're close with the president, from his home state, obviously.
Where's he from? I used to ride the train together for many years now.
Are you 100% confident? There's been a lot of speculation that he will run for a second term.
I am, and if you go back, I'll be real honest with you, if you go back like a year ago into the administration, you ask people in my caucus, Senate Democrats, should the president run again? And people would say, well, if he wants to run again, then he should. And today, almost everybody's lined up and say he should run again, and if he does, I'll support him.
And why is that?
I'm still on the fence, but you know.
Why do you think that is? Is because obviously
the first couple of years, just incredible. First 2 years, first major bipartisan infrastructure bill, the most, I think, meaningful bipartisan infrastructure bill. Roads, highways, bridges, water, drinking water, sanitation, big climate package included in that. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, which has all kinds of things with respect to healthcare access, to pharmaceuticals, and just making sure that we're going to be mindful of climate change and how warm our planet is getting, and how do we address that and create jobs. I mean, it's just pretty remarkable. And he's pretty good at working across the aisle where we can, and when we can't, then we have to go it alone.
Let's talk about the IRA and its healthcare provisions, some significant prescription drug price provisions in there. And Democrats have said their success in 2024 will depend on the messaging of and implementation of these major bills, including the IRA. How is the IRA going to improve people's lives? And remember, it does take a couple years for an implementation of these provisions. So that's another tricky thing for Democrats.
Yeah, we have a Rite Aid drugstore close to our house. You go in there, they have a sign that says, have you gotten your shingles shot yet? Shingles, they're not cheap. And for a lot of folks on Medicare, it's been the price has been a prohibiting factor. Now I think if the cost is $35, there's a cap, $35 a month on getting the. That's for insulin, $35, $2,000 a year for insulin, $35 a month for shingles. And a lot of people are taking shingles now that otherwise would not have done that. It improves their quality of life. It brings down healthcare costs as well.
What is we have divided government now. The midterms were good to the president. Republicans did barely win the House, but they didn't win back the Senate. So now everyone's talking about 2024. What is the agenda for the Senate Finance Committee on health care?
Part of it is implementation and oversight. I used to chair the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and we'd be doing oversight hearings, and I would say to the witnesses on whatever we're doing oversight on, I'd say, what should we do more? What would your advice to us on this committee? Say, do more oversight. So we're going to do one heck of a lot of oversight. Want to make sure that we're implementing and making sure that people in the country actually know what we've done and why it's actually a good thing.
Do you think that there can be significant pieces of legislation that move through the Senate and the House and get to the president's desk?
Oh, sure. Sure.
What do you see?
Yeah, we've passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Actually did a lot of clean energy funding, and but we have a situation where we'll say, with room here, people on this side will say they're creating clean energy in their part of the country. Folks over here in a different part of the country need that clean energy. And the question is, how do we get that clean energy to where it needs to go and do it in a cost-effective way, in a timely way? It's called permitting reform, and that's a huge priority. And it's something that can get bipartisan support from the environmental community, from the business community, from Democrats and Republicans. And Shelley Capito and I, who lead the Committee on Environment and Public Works, 2 kids from West Virginia, we're going to be holding a hearing probably right after this 2-week recess that's coming up. And on permitting reform, we'll work with Joe Manchin, we'll work with Republicans, other Republicans, and Democrats as well, and with the business community.
Now, House Republicans today are debating their big energy bill. That includes permitting reform. Now that energy bill is not going to move in the Senate, but maybe there's some compromise on permitting reform.
Actually, what it does, I think Chuck Schumer, our leader in the Senate, declared it dead on arrival when it was introduced a couple of weeks ago. What we're doing is going through it, trying to understand it. I'm trying to meet with Republican leaders on the relevant committees and see are there some provisions here that we can literally adopt and put into a bipartisan permitting reform bill. Are there some provisions in the H.R. 1, the House bill? Are there some provisions that, with some work, could actually be made helpful and be included in the package? Joe Manchin offered a permitting legislation right at the end of the last session.
Yep.
It lost on a 47-47 vote. It was a tie vote, so it lost. But there's a bunch of good ideas in there. We've met with, just this week, with John Podesta and folks from the White House in terms of what do you think? What does the administration think we should do? And I think we have the opportunity to pull together Democrats and Republicans' ideas and include the private sector that will get the job done, and we should. And let me just say, there's great opportunity here. And I like to say in adversity lies opportunity. And there's great adversity here in terms of climate change and all that. But there's real opportunity to create, not only do good things for our planet, but to create jobs.
Do you think anything can happen in a bipartisan fashion on health care? Because obviously the IRA was supported by Democrats, the Affordable Care Act was supported by Democrats, no Republican support. Conversely, the Trump tax cuts, all Republicans and no Democrats. So we've seen more polarization, at least on sweeping legislation. However, we've seen the 21st Century Cures Act pass in recent history. Do you think anything can happen? And do you think if anything's going to happen, whether it's health care or energy or whatever, it's got to happen this year, not next year?
Yeah, actually, we've laid the groundwork on healthcare, and we've talked about some of them in terms of pricing of Shingles Act, access for seniors shingles. We put a cap, $2,000 a year cap on Medicare drug costs for most of our seniors. Not everybody knows about those, but part of what we're doing is implementing them, but making sure people know about it. I like to say, there's one of my favorite sayings is, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, is there a noise? Mm-hmm. And there could be a great program out there to help benefit seniors. And if nobody knows about it, a noise is a real benefit. One example, there's a program called the PACE program that a lot of people are familiar with for seniors. And if a senior is in the PACE program and they get their prescription drug costs through the PACE program, it's a lot more expensive than it would be if they could shop outside of the PACE program. And I think it's Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, a very thoughtful guy, doctor. We have legislation that would allow, give seniors the choice to do that and save some money for them, and I think enable them to have the access to the medication that they need. You
mentioned Senator Cassidy. He's been at many of our events on health care. Can you talk a little bit about how bipartisan does exist on some issues? You mentioned Senator Capito. A lot of the headlines, it's R versus D, debt limit fight, showdown, government shutdown. But there is, you've been committed to bipartisanship, and you've reached across the aisle. That does still exist, even though maybe it doesn't get the headlines.
I've been saying for years, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. I serve as a senior Democrat and chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee. We have jurisdiction over climate change, roads, highways, bridges, water, wastewater, sanitation. When we did the bipartisan infrastructure bill, she and I co-authored large pieces of that together. Mm-hmm. And we're doing the same thing with recycling legislation. We're going to be, we've agreed to hold a bipartisan hearing in 2 weeks when we come back from this recess, focusing on permitting reform. So the press, the nature of the press is if Shelley Capito and I were like best friends and got along and agreed on everything, they wouldn't cover that. But if we had fights and arguments all the time, we'll get attention.
Sure.
I'm not, that's not my nature. I want to get stuff done. And we have that, we just have a great agreement. Later today, we do this almost every Thursday. Shelley Capito and I will meet either in person or she may be in her car heading for back to West Virginia. And we'll just talk about where we are, what we need to do over the next 2 weeks, what kind of hearings do we need to prepare for, who would she like to see invited as witnesses. And when I have to leave a hearing or something that's going on to go over to another committee, it's a meeting to vote that I serve on, I give her the gavel, and that doesn't happen every day. Mm-hmm. And there's just a sense of trust, and I hope we provide an example for other members that they'll find helpful too.
Medicare was obviously a big topic tackled in the President's State of the Union address. got a little feisty there in the House chamber. Medicare is not going to be reformed over the next couple of years. Both parties, at least the leaders, agree on that. But you speak of bipartisanship and seniors, it's going to have to be reformed at some point, right?
Yeah, I met yesterday with Gene Dodaro. Not many Americans have heard of Gene Dodaro. A lot of people have heard GAO, Governmental Accountability Office. He has been the leader of the Governmental Accountability Office. They're the watchdog, the fiscal watchdog, if you will, for the Congress. And at the beginning of every new Congress, every 2 years, along about March, this time of year, the GAO comes out with, they promulgate something called their high-risk list. It's a high-risk list of ways that we could waste money, or we are wasting money. And for me, that's my to-do list. And I work with Democrats and Republicans. When Tom Coburn, Republican from Oklahoma, you'll recall, great guy, he's now deceased. He and I used to take that every 2 years and made that our to-do list to get to save money. And voters, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican or Independent, people don't want us to waste money. And this is just a good list of ways to avoid doing that.
When you're home in Delaware, what are your constituents most frustrated about, specifically on healthcare? What's the feedback you get?
Yeah, I have a lot of people who mention, a growing number of people who mention PBMs. Pharmacy benefit managers, and the questioning the value that they provide, and whether or not they provide value, and what is their effect and impact on cost. And I think we're going to see hearings in a number of committees, Finance Committee and probably the Health Committee and others, trying to better understand the role of PBMs and to make sure that they're actually a positive force in this. I always ask 4 questions when people were talking about healthcare issues, including pharmaceutical issues. One of the questions I ask is a particular ideas is put on the table. How does it affect the pocketbook of just not regular people? The impact on individuals. What is the impact on the deficit? What is the impact for our taxpayers? Third question: how does it affect creativity and innovation? And the last question is: does it make the healthcare delivery system, which is already pretty complex, it does make it more complex or less so? So I ask those 4 questions, and we need to ask those 4 questions with respect to pharmacy benefit managers, and we're going to be doing that. And but that's actually something I hear. Boy, 2, 3, 4 years ago, people couldn't even spell PBM, and now we hear about it more than you might imagine.
Do you think now that House Republicans have taken over the lower chamber, yes, they in some of their budget bullet points, they do take aim at the Affordable Care Act, but at the same time, we're not hearing repeal anymore, at least as much as we used to. Are those Obamacare wars over?
Yeah, I think that one is.
Right.
I think that one's been decided, and I think for the most part, people realize it's a good thing. That when we first started coming up with community-based outpatient clinics for folks, for lower income people in communities across the country, there are a lot of folks that say that's welfare, that's socialism. We don't want to do that. But actually, I think almost everybody, we got like thousands, over I think maybe 10, 15,000 of them across people, 350 million people across the country are getting their health care. I think that's the right number through these community-based outpatient clinics. But it took a while, and I think the same thing has happened with the Affordable Care Act. Well, I mentioned this to you earlier. When we had the signing ceremony, Barack Obama signed the Affordable Care Act into law. There were hundreds of people that were there at the signing ceremony, and he went around thanking people. He came right up to me, put his hands on my shoulders just like this. He said, "Tom, this would never have happened without you." And I said, "Gosh, thanks a lot, Mr. President." And I did work a lot on it. Then I found out he said that to everybody. Oh well.
Smart, smart president. Okay, we're back in person. Most people are kind of returning back to the office at least a couple times a week. COVID, over it's amazing. It's been 3 years. What, from a policymaking perspective, have you learned? I was mentioning earlier that Mitch McConnell, survivor of polio, was just stunned that it became so political and there were so many anti-vaxxers out there, and he was just stunned that so many people who had access to it wouldn't take it. What do you take away? Because it was just such an unusual 3-year journey.
Well, for me, I'm a guy, I said earlier, I like to work across the aisle. I like to get things done, and I think that's what most people in Delaware would want us to do. For me, the takeaway is this is not the first pandemic we've ever had. This may be the worst, one of the two worst we've had in the last 100 years. But we'll likely had others in the future. And what we need to do is learn from what we did well over the last 3 years, and maybe what we didn't do so well. I like to see find out what works, do more of that. And the converse of that is find out what doesn't work and do less of that. And what doesn't work is not working across the aisle. The last thing I would say, Jefferson used to say, he used to say when he was president, if people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. People know the truth, they won't make a mistake. And for a lot of people, we don't know what the truth is these days. And we have an obligation to be truthful. The media can play a huge role in that, and we need for them to keep that in mind.
The big issue for the year, at least policy-wise, is the debt limit. How's that going to end?
I think our Republican friends realize if we end up with a debt crisis and shut down the government, it's going to end not well for them. And they're being reminded of that by our president and by Democratic leaders in the House and Senate, and by me. And I think the Republicans see me as somebody who more often than not likes to try to work with them and find the middle. I'm a recovering state treasurer. I recovering governor. When I was elected state treasurer, we had the worst credit rating in the country. And then later on, when I was governor, we got the best credit rating in the country. And so I care a lot about these fiscal matters. And I think I'm pretty good at working across the aisle, and I'm going to be doing my best to work with Republicans and say, do you really, this would be, if you take us to the brink and shut down the government again, it will not, it won't be in your best political interest, and it won't be certainly in the interest of the country.
And also along those lines, which is tied to it, is a government shutdown. I mean, a lot of House Republicans want to retract part of the IRA, specifically on the IRS and additional IRS employees. Do you think that a government shutdown could happen?
Yeah, when I served as governor of Delaware, the state division of government that dealt with taxes was called the Division of Revenue. And they usually think of the taxpayer, tax collector, bad. And but my last year as governor of Delaware, the Division of Revenue won the Quality Award for providing great customer service to taxpayers, business and personal. We have gone through a period of time where the IRS has been starved for money. They have not had the money they need to hire people to provide advice on the phone or respond to questions, and much less to provide do the watchdog role. This is an interesting number. If you go back a year ago, before we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and included provisions that provide the human resources and technology that they need at the IRS, something like 13% of the phone calls into the IRS were being answered. 13% a year ago. The last month, the numbers like 90% are being answered.
Okay.
And that's, the IRS is not, they have a responsibility to collect the taxes that are owed by people that are making money and businesses that are making money, a lot of it. But they also have an obligation to provide service.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about the implementation of the IRA, specifically on drug pricing, what are you looking for to make sure that they do it the right way? Because obviously the press focuses on legislation intently, but less so on implementation. Mm-hmm.
The President in the State of the Union address talked a great deal. He's proud of what we've accomplished. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But he also talked a good bit about finishing the job we've begun. Part of the finishing the job we've begun is to implement well, to make sure that, and to do the oversight responsibility that I talked about earlier, and make sure that that people know about what we've done. We can take advantage of that. But we also are checking to make sure that it's working as we had hoped for. And so there's plenty of work still to do, and I look forward to being involved with that.
The Inflation Reduction Act was basically a massive piece of legislation, but it was pared back from Build Back Better. Now, because of divided government, I've talked to some Democrats who say, well, we're not going to be able to pick up some of the pieces that got on the cutting room floor, but in 2025, maybe we can, because obviously, as you know, the White House and the House and Senate are all up for grabs. Are there pieces of Build Back Better that should be revisited that didn't make it into the IRA?
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
I'm just going to focus right now. We've done a lot of which I think most Americans say, well, that makes sense. We just got to make sure we do a good job in implementing it, and find out what works, do more of that, find out what doesn't work, do less of that. That's sort of common sense. That's the way I was raised, and I think that's what we need to do.
And speaking of the next election, instead of jumping over it, how do you think politically, with President Biden expected, as you said, to announce his bid for re-election, we've got a contested primary on the other side.
I've noticed that.
And it's...
Bring it on.
What do you think is the advantage of not having to, or at least the president, I know Marianne Williamson is in, but generally speaking, he's going to be able to raise money, and these guys are going to go at each other. At the same time, you never know what's going to happen down the road. But how can Democrats take advantage of this time when Republicans are going through, as you know, the party that's divided is the party that's usually losing?
Yeah. My parents were Republicans. I was born in West Virginia, raised in Virginia, went to, was Navy ROTC at Ohio State and Vietnam War after that. But this is not my parents' Republican Party. My mom and dad must be rolling in the grave today to see and to hear some of what is taking place. Joe Biden has a lot of sayings. I've heard them all, but one of my favorites is just because somebody is your opponent doesn't mean they have to be your enemy.
Right.
Just because somebody is your opponent, they don't have to be your enemy. I believe that to my core, and I think the voters in our country, by the time we vote again, what is it, like a year and a half from now. At the end of the day, they're going to be looking, more than anything else, is what have you gotten done to address the needs of our country, to keep the economy growing, to try to make sure that we fully implemented this important legislation, done the right thing on health. What have you actually done to make a difference in my life? And we have an obligation to tell the story again and again and again. And you get to the point where you're just like sick and tired of delivering the message. That means it's finally breaking through. And I remember when I was governor, I'd been governor like a year, back in the 1990s. And we had a retreat at the end of the first year. And all my cabinet was there, and my senior advisors were there. And we did an exercise, and the exercise was we want everybody to write a press release on Tom Carper's first 8 years as governor of Delaware, and what he accomplished, got done, and everything. And everybody dutifully wrote that. One guy, a guy named Vince McConey, who was one of my cabinet secretaries, a very funny guy, he wrote a different piece. He wrote a piece that said, why did Tom Carper not get reelected after 4 years? And the reason why, well, the concern he raised, he said, nobody knows what you're doing. You know, it just was not a clear, concise message, not repeating and so forth. And boy, 7 years later, people knew what we'd done. And they may not have liked it all, but they knew what we'd done. I think for the most part they liked it. So we've got to do a really good job of messaging. When we're getting tired of saying it, maybe by then it's just breaking through.
Joe Biden said last question.
If people know the truth, they won't make a mistake.
The transportation bill you mentioned earlier, and that got through the Senate pretty easily. The House was a different situation. And transportation, as you know, usually is a very bipartisan effort.
And the thing is hard is how to pay for it.
Right.
It's always
It's
hard
the pay
how to pay
for
for it. I've always said those who use transportation, roads, highways, bridges have an obligation to help pay for that.
But do you see, as far as policy making, because you said your parents would be rolling over in their graves with this Republican Party, Joe Biden said the fever would break after he got elected, meaning the Trump fever, but it hasn't. Do you think it will at some point? Because that affects policy making.
Yeah. I'm not going to speculate. That's the Republicans. It's their job to find who they want to nominate, who they want to embrace and nominate. I wish them well. A bunch of them are my friends. I wish them well.
But your advice to your own party is message of what? Because as you know, and I was skeptical the transportation bill was going to get through. There was a lot of legislation that got through in an election year last year.
Yeah.
But you got to tell people about it.
Yeah, we've got to tell them. And one of the nice things about not having maybe a contested presidential primary on our side is the opportunity to deliver a clear message over and over and over again, to let people know what we've tried to accomplish, what we think they've asked us to do, and to say this is what we've done and how we're doing it. And this is how it makes a difference in your life.
Please thank the Senator for joining us this morning. Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's amazing.
In closing, let me just say, come and see us in Delaware. We have more 5-star beaches than any state in America. One of them is called Rehoboth, which means, the word Rehoboth means room for all, including you. So come and see us.
But I just want to ask, do you think that how soon we're going to be able to get the parties together to extend the life of Medicare and Social Security. Is that going to take a while?
I know. Right now, I'm going to focus for like the next couple of weeks on permitting reform, and then we'll do something
And are you
else.
confident that, because the left doesn't like that bill, you think that'll get through?
On permitting reform?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
What they're especially concerned about on the environmental communities, they should be. We've done all this work on clean energy. Creating electricity without creating carbon, and making that situation worse. But we're creating the energy in one part of the country. We need to be finding ways to be able to deliver that energy to other parts of the country. And so it's a good challenge, but a good opportunity as well.
Okay.
And the environmental community understands that, and they like that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Senator, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
All right. Y'all take care. Thank you.